I believe that Karl Marx and Engels realized their most effective tool to destroy capitalism would be the environment. 1883.
My guest today is Brian Sussman.
Thanks, Tom. And by the way, Tom, thanks for putting together this platform. It's a platform of truth. And you have so many wonderful and brilliant scientists that come on a regular basis. I feel a little out of place because I'm kind of a hybrid. Now, I'm a meteorologist, but also a political commentator. But you bring forth some super high-level geniuses, and I learn from this podcast. And I'd also just like to take a moment to thank you for producing Climate, the movie. The fact that this is being seen all over the world in different subtitles. I mean, it's just fantastic. So again, honored to be here once again. I should mention the last time I was on this podcast was in the spring. It was just before my book, Climate Cult, came out. And even though we were in pre-sale mode when I was on this podcast, being on this popular platform allowed the book to become #1 in environmental, #1 in political science on Amazon right off the bat. So again, I just thank you for that. I'm entitling this presentation A Plea for Climate Sanity. I mean, here we are, depending on when you're watching this, we're posting this just a few days before the election. And this is a huge election. And I just find it fascinating that climate has not been a part of the discussion. You hear a little bit from Donald Trump and the Republicans, but you don't hear much at all from the Democrats that are pushing this climate change agenda. They've dropped it from the radar. So I'm going to talk about that. I'll talk to you a little bit from my book, Climate Cult, Exposing and Defeating Their War on Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, or, if you will, the ownership of property. But this is a plea for climate sanity for such a time as this. And again, I'll be drawing quotes from my book, Climate Cult, and sharing some things in this that I think are going to be jaw droppers for you. When you see how I connect the dots and show you how far this climate agenda goes, this wild climate agenda that's void of science and filled with garbage, when you see how far back this goes, it's a propaganda campaign that began in the 1800s. Now, here's the deal. As I mentioned, the Democrats right now, specifically Kamala Harris, they are being urged to flesh out their climate plan. This is something taken from the Tampa Bay Times. This is just after Milton hit Florida. And she wasn't saying a lot about climate change. The Democrats really wanted her to say something about climate change. They were urging her to flesh out her climate agenda because Trump was talking about their plans and talking about how foolish and costly they were. It's really interesting. This is from The Guardian on October 18th. So this is really fresh. This was Paul Bledsoe, who was an advisor to Bill Clinton's White House on climate. So this is a guy who's been playing ball in this particular field for a long time. Here's what he had to say. The lack of a climate focus from the Harris campaign has been frustrating, but was probably a calculation. A calculation. You see, they don't want you to know what they're talking about and what they're planning because they don't want the people to realize that this plan is the reason why we have high gas prices, is the reason why we have high diesel prices, is the reason why home heating, electricity bills are through the roof. There are people in this country who don't like their plan because they don't want to buy an electric car. They like the car they have. So this is Paul Bledsoe, Democratic advisor, saying it's probably really smart that the Harris campaign isn't showing their cards on climate change right now. It's probably not going to go over that well with the people of the United States of America at this particular time in our nation's history. So this is something else. Keeping in part with this, Kamala Harris, who up to this point in time has been all for example, fracking. She's so against big oil. She's against fracking. For that matter, she's against nuclear, which is carbon free. But suddenly, because she needs those 19 electoral votes from Pennsylvania, suddenly she says, oh, I'll never ban fracking. Okay. She was for it, and now she's against it because she wants those 19 electoral votes. Listen, people are seeing through this, and I think the people in Pennsylvania see through this as well. Here's her quote: I will not ban fracking. I did not do it as vice president. In fact, I cast the tie-breaking vote to open up more fracking leases. Stop the press. This isn't true. The vote she's talking about was for the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act. That's the biggest green boondoggle in the history of the United States of America. It's $400 billion going to various green programs that have nothing to do with lowering the Earth's atmospheric temperature, nothing to do with reducing CO2. This is all about a payoff, especially to non-governmental organizations, in the form of $400 billion. And there's some redistribution of wealth involved as well to the people in terms of various, well, for example, if you want to purchase an electric vehicle, you can get a tax credit of $7,500 from the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, usually tax credits are paid to you after you've filed your taxes. But in this particular case, if your dealership has registered with the Department of Treasury, you can get that $7,500 right now and use it as a down payment for your electric vehicle. So in other words, you won't have to put any money down. You could finance it over 7 years at about $1,000 a month, have your $7,500 down payment, and you're in. She cast the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which, in order to endure some Republicans to vote for it, it did things like allowed for a certain amount of fracking in a certain amount of states. So when she says, I cast the tie-breaking vote to open up more fracking leases, not exactly true. That vote was for the Inflation Reduction Act. Here she is in Michigan, hitting back against Trump over his electric car attacks. And what she says is, let me be clear. Let me be clear. I'm not going to tell you what kind of car you have to drive. Well, of course, she's not going to tell you what kind of car you have to drive, because the government's going to pressure you into buying the car that you don't want to have. Because earlier this year, Biden's EPA finalized a tough tailpipe emissions rule to ensure that more than half the new cars in the United States would be hybrid or all electric by 2023. In other words, they're forcing you down this rat hole. Hey, you may love your diesel truck. You may love your beat up old sedan. I drive a 2002 Dodge Ram. It's got over 230,000 miles on it. I love the vehicle. Gets terrible mileage, but I like the vehicle. I don't want to spend a boatload of money on an electric vehicle. I don't like being told what to do like that. But this is where they're taking us. They're going to make it so that there aren't going to be a lot of combustion engines on the market. You're going to have to go electric. And quite frankly, people don't like it. So that's why she has to change her tune and say, no, you can drive whatever car you want to drive. And then under her breath, she's thinking, you just won't have much of a choice when we're done with you. So this is the game that they're playing. I have a chapter of the book, chapter 8 in Climate Cult, where it's called Alternative Fantasies, because so many of the alternatives that they have planned for us in terms of energy are they're not based on fact. They're not based on science. They're based on fantasy. So in chapter 8, I liken back to my second book, which was Eco-Tyranny. My first book was Climategate, Exposing and Defeating Climategate, a veteran meteorologist exposes the global warming scam. That was from 2010, and it did exceptionally well. Eco-Tyranny was a book that really got into the details of what they're doing in America, especially regarding land usage. And it didn't do as well as Climategate, maybe because the title was a little scary, Eco-Tyranny. But anyway, here's what I say in chapter 8 of the new book. In my book, Eco-Tyranny, I I talk about the Obama years. When added up, the Obama administration oversaw about $100 billion in giveaways to wind and solar producers, electric car companies, and home and building weatherization assistance. It amounted to a huge corporate welfare experiment enriching both industry and investors. The irony is, despite all these losses, $100 billion, it was a huge boondoggle. If you were an early investor and you got into some of these solar programs that never got on the ground or wind programs that never got off the ground, you got all this federal money and you were able to make bank really easy before the thing went bust. I'm thinking of a company in the Silicon Valley where I was doing my radio show in San Francisco called Solyndra, which absolutely went bust. And that's why I come to this microphone and this place and this book from a different perspective. I mean, I was a TV meteorologist for many, many years. But after that, I decided to go into political talk radio because I was just fed up with everything that was happening. So I wear two hats, essentially. So as I look into some of these things Joe Biden is saying, he's saying climate change is the number one issue facing humanity. Really? And it's the number one issue for me, he says. Climate change is the existential threat to humanity. No one is going to build another oil or gas-fired electric plant. They're going to build one that is fired by renewable energy, which, again, that's a total fantasy. So I continue talking about the goal of the Democrat Party and that of the state of California and that of the World Economic Forum in their embrace of this whole idea of net zero. You know, no carbon dioxide being emitted into the atmosphere to generate electricity. This is a meticulous scheme to supposedly decarbonize the energy grid. And this is why Congress passed a $1 trillion energy infrastructure package signed into law November 2021. Didn't get a lot of press. I mean, $1 trillion. A big part of that plan is to have solar energy provide 40% of America's electricity grid by 2035. So 40% of the grid, solar, 2035. It's an unrealistic figure, as I write, given that since the days of Obama's presidency, solar power has only expanded, listen to this, from less than 1% of the nation's electricity portfolio to 3.4% today. But wait, there's more. There's an organization that's based out of Princeton. It's called Net Zero America. They got loads of federal money to provide all of this research and come up with a plan on how we could totally have a net zero grid. So no more fossil fuels in the grid. I'm going to share this with you, and this is laughable. You can't believe that they're actually serious about this plan, but they are. And everybody's all in on this thing. So again, here's a little bit from their final report, which was issued in October 2021. They say this: in this highly electrified economy, wind and solar provide 4 times the electric power capacity of the 2020 US grid. So in other words, take the grid, today, or in this particular case from 2020, and we're going to have 4 times the electric power capacity. Electricity powers all the vehicles. It's going to heat all the homes. It's going to power many industrial processes. And when demand peaks and the grid needs an extra boost, it'll come from a mix of batteries, hydropower, combustion turbines, burning carbon-free synthetic fuels, and hydrogen. So this is the grid that they envision for us. In this particular case, now this is what I just find astounding. When you dig into the details, they're saying that the amount of acreage needed for the solar in this Net Zero America plan would be 17.5 million acres. The acreage necessary for the wind would be 250 million acres. So I had to just dive into this. I mean, these figures don't mean anything unless you can visualize them. So I have a map here of the beautiful Midwest. If their plan goes through, they're anticipating half of Indiana to be, I mean, an acreage, the equivalent of half of Indiana to be all solar. And then Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Kentucky, Illinois, and southern Indiana would all be wind turbines. I mean, say goodbye to the birds. And by the way, nothing to say here. I mean, what about those point in time when you have a huge dome of high pressure over the United States, which happens, a huge dome of high pressure, air is stagnant, there's no wind. Those wind turbines aren't working. Or turn it around. Maybe you have a huge baroclinic zone sweeping across North America and cloud, days on end. Okay, that's the end of your solar in northern Indiana. But on top of that, you can have very, very gusty winds because wind turbines don't work when the wind is too gusty. And they certainly don't work when there's not enough wind. But this is the plan coming out of these geniuses. I use the word loosely, the geniuses from Princeton. This is right from my book, Climate Cult. If the United States were to attempt to build a grid with 80% of its energy coming from solar and wind, an unfathomably huge battery storage system would be required. So never mind, friends. That's been covered. Oh, they've got this handled. So Princeton then hands off to MIT. According to the genius minds at MIT, 12 hours of battery storage for this grid that's being proposed by Princeton, 12 hours of battery storage would cost more than $2.5 trillion. This is mind-boggling. But they're serious about this. The net zero research from Princeton is straightforward. If the United States is to have a carbon-free economy by 2050, but does not want to invest in the land equivalent of 7 states to do it, then we'll need to rely far less on wind and solar, and instead, okay, ready for this? This is their plan B, build hundreds of nuclear plants and natural gas plants outfitted with systems to capture the carbon dioxide before it escapes into the atmosphere. Now, 2 things about that. One, the left loathes nuclear. Anytime you talk to somebody about nuclear who's on the left, big environmentalist, they'll immediately say, Chernobyl, Fukushima. Okay, we have, I believe there are 440 nuclear power plants in the world. They're all running extremely well. And in the United States, I believe it's 44 nuclear plants and 93 nuclear reactors. So we've got it going on even in the United States of America. But the left can't stand nuclear power. Why? Because it's so efficient. Doesn't produce any carbon. Because here's the deal. They want to control you. They don't want, the whole idea of having a 4-bedroom house with 2,000 square feet, they don't like that. They want you in stack and pack housing. They want you in 15-minute cities. They don't want you to have more power. They want you to have less. They want to control you with energy usage. Now, stay tuned. I'm gonna get, your jaw's gonna drop when I connect some dots in just a moment. But then the other part of this is when you talk about these natural gas plants, natural gas is great. It's fantastic. We've got this abundant resource that, again, the left wants to put off limits, this abundant resource in the United States of America. But capturing carbon dioxide before it escapes into the atmosphere and burying it underground, that is incredibly costly. So you want to see your electricity bill go through the roof? Allow either one of these plans to take place. Solar is incredibly expensive in terms of to build and therefore to produce power. Very expensive. Wind turbines have to be maintained on a regular basis. Otherwise, they fall apart. And by the way, where is all that steel being made? From dirty plants, generally speaking, in China. It's amazing how they put all these pressures on we here in the United States. We, the people in the United States of America, get all of the pressure to conform when, have you been to China? You should see the dirty coal plants they have there. I mean, They actually employ a certain type of geoengineering to wash the soot out of the sky. Have you been to India? Same thing. I have a friend who's a missionary in Calcutta. He literally has to wear one of those N95 masks on a daily basis because the particulate is so dense. So their plans are foolhardy. But again, getting back to Princeton's Plan B, 44% wind and solar, 6% hydrogeothermal, 50% nuclear and natural gas. This would mean, to do their Plan B, we would need to build in the United States of America 250 1 gigawatt nuclear plants. Currently, there are 44 plants. We need to build 250. I don't see the left going for this plan. And you'd need 300 natural gas-fired power plants with a network of carbon capture pipelines and carbon storage facilities. This Plan B is not the left's Plan A. Instead, they want to do the wind and solar, which is going to allow for a grid that is constantly in turmoil, constantly breaking down, constant rolling blackouts, constant energy shortages. This is what they have planned. Oh, and then there's this guy. Tom, I stole from your Twitter feed, your X feed. This was great. So this is from Wide Awake Media. The climate crisis is killing people. See, they have their ambassadors, their propaganda ambassadors, who are trying to scare people in going for these plans, these ridiculous plans that keep going forward. Here's John Kerry. Every year now, he says, millions of people around this planet are dying as the result of greenhouse gas pollution. I mean, I love what you say here, Tom. 100% scam, zero science. There is not one shred of truth to this kind of, it's not even misinformation. This is disinformation, total fabrication. Millions of people around the planet are dying as a result of greenhouse gas pollution, caused by the way we choose to fuel our vehicles, heat our homes, and light our factories. Can you believe that this guy is able to get away with this kind of absolute beyond nonsense? It's amazing. But they've made CO2 into a designer pollutant. In Climate Called, I call CO2 the designer pollutant. In my book, Climategate, there was actually a chapter called Designer Pollutant. Listen, this audience knows this to be true. And maybe there are some people, watching this for the very first time. You've discovered Tom Nelson, and now you're listening to me. CO2 is a necessary ingredient for life. We can't live without it. It's a trace gas. It's a minor gas in the atmosphere, as I'll talk about in just a moment. But more is actually better. Just down the street from where I live, there's a huge cannabis warehouse. They grow cannabis indoors in this warehouse. It's tiered growing, so it's incredibly efficient. So they have these tiers of cannabis, marijuana plants growing under UV lighting, and they pump that environment up with 3 times the amount of CO2 that you would find outdoors. So they're generating CO2 because the plants grow much healthier and much faster. They're a business. They want their business to boom. So they're growing their product with the use of CO2 generators. Throughout time, as I talk about in the book, CO2 levels have fluctuated. We can find that from the geological record. More CO2 is actually a good thing. In fact, there's the CO2coalition.org. And I love the CO2coalition.org because these are some brilliant scientists who are all saying, nothing wrong with CO2, friends. It's a variable gas. So essentially 0.04 of the atmosphere, 0.04% of the atmosphere. Michael Crichton had a book called State of Fear. He did this brilliant analogy. He took a football field and he showed you all the atmospheric gases and how much space they take up on this 100-yard football field. The last 1.44 inches of the field represents CO2. And of that, how much of the CO2 in the atmosphere is created by humankind, through the burning of fossil fuels, for example? How much of that? It would be a line equivalent to the width of a dime. That's it. So in other words, of that 0.04% of the atmosphere, only 4% of that amount is generated by humans. I've got a very good friend who sees things the way I see things regarding the atmosphere, sees things the way Tom sees things regarding the atmosphere. And he's a mathematician at a very well-known company in the Silicon Valley. So I was sharing these stats with him, and I said, Jeff, could you just help me and help the audience of my book wrap their brains around this a little better? 4% of 0.04%. Can you help me out with that? So he said, no problem. Here it is. Only 1 out of every 62,000 molecules in the atmosphere is created by human activity. Friends, only 1 out of every 62,000 molecules. There is no carbon dioxide emergency. Carbon dioxide is necessary for life. Despite what John Kerry says, it is not a pollutant. It allows us to live better. And then we come to her. This is VP Harris, United Nations Climate Summit. She was the ambassador speaking on behalf of the United States of America. This is in Dubai, 2023. She said, this is a pivotal moment. Our action collectively, or worse, our inaction, will impact billions of people for decades to come. Around the world, there are those who seek to slow or stop our progress, leaders who deny climate science, denier, delay climate action, and spread misinformation. Oh, like John Kerry, perhaps? Can I just tell you something? This is something that's always bothered me, and I know it's bothered a lot of you. The scientific method demands skepticism. This is why we take a hypothesis and we just try to just beat it with a club, trying to break it down to see if it's true or not true. Being a skeptic is a good thing in the world of science. And delaying climate action, especially when their action doesn't lead to any kind of result whatsoever other than spend lots of taxpayer money. Since the Little Ice Age, this is a graph, by the way, it's from the 1990 UN IPCC report on the climate. So this is the 1990 report. This chart, I believe, was crafted from the University of East Anglia. This is, by the way, before Michael Mann's hockey stick. So this is what we always said it was like. Medieval warm period, warmer than today. Then you had the Little Ice Age and then a rise in temperature. The rise in temperature also corresponds essentially with the Industrial Revolution. So since the Little Ice Age, we've had billions and billions more people on planet Earth, okay? We've had billions and billions of cars burning fossil fuels and trucks burning fossil fuels and planes and tractors and HVAC units and coal and gas plants and machinery and you just name it, right? Since the Little Ice Age, since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And so if carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that when it's unnaturally fed, it raises the temperature, I just find it amazing if that's where you are. Temperature's only gone up 1.2 degrees Celsius since all of this industry began with the billions and billions of cars, trucks, planes, tractors, HVAC units, coal, gas plants, et cetera, and billions of people belching and passing gas and all of the cows and 1.2 degrees. Friends, their theory falls apart so fast. And yet you get high school dropouts like this guy. Okay, he's a high school dropout. He is a guy who is an actor. He's the UN ambassador for peace. He says, just like John Kerry, climate change is killing the earth and ruining our economy. I look around at planet Earth and I see lots of beauty. I, I don't see a dying Earth. I see our economy being ruined because of wild spending in Washington, D.C. But he says we need a bold step forward to save our country and our planet and ourselves. And that's why I'm voting for Kamala. This is from Variety magazine just last week. Climate change is killing the Earth. So is this the kind of misinformation that Kamala Harris was talking about, or disinformation? Theirs is built on a campaign of propaganda. Now, I love this guy. Tom, I know you like him as well. Dr. John Clauser. This is the Nobel laureate. And it's amazing how he's so dismissed. This is a guy who's also part of the CO2 coalition, but I write about him in Climate Cult. Here's what he says. I read all of the various United Nations International Panel on Climate Change reports and the National Academy reports on this subject. And as a physicist, genius, I'd worked at some excellent institutions, Caltech. I mean, my gosh, I didn't have the grade point average in high school to walk on the Caltech campus. These guys are geniuses. Columbia, Cal Berkeley, where very careful science needed to be done. And reading these reports, I was appalled at how sloppy the work was. And in particular, it was very obvious, even in the earliest reports, and all carried through onto the present, that clouds were not at all understood. It's simply bad science. His point is, and for those of you who understand the climate models, you know this to be true. Think about this. Clouds are estimated in these models. We make an estimate for cloud cover. We know that clouds interfere with solar radiation coming to planet Earth. Bounces the radiation back. And yet we manipulate the data in such a way that there's a huge opportunity for purposeful bias in creating results by estimating cloud cover. And so when Dr. Clauser was looking into the models for the very first time and looking at the history of this climate change phenomena, he was blown away at how absolutely bogus the entire modeling process is. Now, there's another guy, Dr. Neal Frank. I have enjoyed this guy for years. I loved him when he was director of the National Hurricane Center from 1974 to 1987. Whenever there was a hurricane, you'd get to Dan Rather from the CBS Evening News coming forward and saying, let's check in with Dr. Neal Frank about this latest hurricane. And he'd give these brilliant reports, so easy to understand. He was chairman of the World Meteorological Organization's Hurricane Committee from 76 to 87. And then he left for TV meteorology at KHOU in Houston from 1987 to 2007. And because I was a TV meteorologist at that same time, I just thought the world of this guy. I thought he did a great job. Now, I'm going to tell you what Dr. Neal had to say. But before I do that, well, here's the quote that I always thought was interesting. This is from 2006 Washington Post. He said, I'm of the opinion that this is one of the greatest hoaxes, climate change, global warming, human-caused, anthropogenic, ever perpetrated on the American people. That's Dr. Neal Frank. Now, I stop right there because I've got to share this story, and then we'll get to these jaw droppers that I've been teasing. The story is this. Before I was a TV meteorologist, I graduated from the University of Missouri. I studied journalism and television production. My first job out of college was managing an ABC TV newsroom. That was my very first job. And I used to watch the weather guy at our television station. And I thought, this guy's got the best job in the world. He's talking about the weather. I love weather. This is so exciting. The bottom line was, I was so struck by the weather guy. Okay, I am managing people and putting in, hours and hours and hours of overtime every week, trying to put the product on the air, the newscast. And the weather guy just thought, he's talking about the weather. This is fantastic. Everybody's interested in the weather. He has more viewers in his segment of the show than anybody else during the other 50 minutes of our program. So I love the weather guy. I used to watch him just intently with a big smile on my face. I thought that's really what I should have done. Well, that's when I went back to university I got my meteorological credentials and became a TV weatherman. Most of my career was in San Francisco. I did 7 years filling in for CBS This Morning and occasionally doing weather hits on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. So here's what happened. Dan Rather came to San Francisco one time and we were having a conversation. He said, Brian, I want you to be our West Coast weather correspondent. Anytime anything breaks on the West Coast, you're going to be the guy we go to talk about it during the CBS Evening News. Wow. I was blown away. And then he said this. This is probably 95. He said, and you know, with all the talk about global warming, I think you'd be the perfect guy to sort it out. This was 95. And here's how I replied. I didn't mean to be offensive, or I just said, well, Dan, you know, the jury's still out on global warming, but I'd be glad to help out. Because in 95, it kind of was, the jury still was out on this. I mean, not even everybody on the left was all in. Al Gore was really just starting to march forward with this theme of human-caused global warming. Dan Rather literally ended the conversation like that, turned and walked away, and I never worked for CBS ever again. Now, I don't know if that had anything to do with the conversation, but I never worked for CBS again. That's one story, but I'll share with you one more story. This is 1997. Al Gore was vice president. He was coming to California to hold an El Nino summit. Those of you who are familiar with weather, you know what the El Nino weather pattern is. It's a warming of the waters along the Pacific coast, and it changes weather patterns globally. He was having an El Nino summit because he was contending that the El Ninos were being influenced by anthropogenic global warming. So again, 1997. The TV station in San Francisco wanted me to go to Santa Barbara to cover this event and front their evening news coverage. I had no problem with that, but I told our executive producer, if you're expecting me to link global warming with El Nino, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. And this led to an argument in the newsroom, which was ended when he stepped forward, lowered his voice, and said, Brian, do you know what your problem is? I didn't know how to respond to that. Do you know what your problem is? You don't know which facts to leave out. You don't know which facts to leave out. Now, it shouldn't surprise anyone, and anyone watching this who worked with me at KPIX TV in 1997 will know just who I'm talking about, and they'll know what I'm about to say is true. Shouldn't surprise anyone that this executive producer was actually president of his SDS chapter in college, Students for a Democrat Society, which was a socialist organization. You see, this is what the other team does. They can get people like John Kerry out there to say the planet's dying, and Leonardo DiCaprio out there to say that people are dying and 1 million people are being killed, as John Kerry. They can get people to say that all day long, because it's not that they don't know which facts to leave out. They'll just make up facts. They'll make up facts. So Dr. Neal sees right through this. And it was at that point in time that when I heard that from my television news producer, I started packing my bags. And it was just a few years later that I ended up quitting television news and going into talk radio, where I could speak my mind on these particular issues and go ahead and write books on the issues as well. So with Dr. Neal Frank, I really wanted to meet him. So I called up the CO2 Coalition, where he's a member, and I said, hey, Brian Sussman here, can you provide me with his contact information? I would love to send him a manuscript of my new book. They gave me his email. I got in contact with Dr. Neal. He had read my book, Climategate. He said, I'd love to read the manuscript of your new book. And I was hoping for an endorsement. And so I was able to get his endorsement, and I'll read it to you in just a moment. And I was also able to get the endorsement of several other guys who I just absolutely think the world of. But for Dr. Neal, this is what he had to say. And he told me this. He said, Brian, think about your subtitle, Exposing and Defeating Their War on Life, Liberty, and Property. He said, this is something you need to share. And this is something you need to share loud because you are on top of what's behind this entire movement. Here's what he says on the back cover of over 30 books I've read on this topic. Sussman has the best understanding of what the climate movement is all about. Climate Cult is a must read. I talked to Dr. Neal just yesterday prior to this podcast, and I told him I was coming on this podcast because he's a big fan. And he said, don't forget, he said, a lot of people think this is all about money and wealth redistribution. It's something bigger than this, and you need to let the people know what's going on. So, Dr. Neal, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to tell you what's driving this crazy movement. I was speaking in the UK earlier this month. I had a series of speaking engagements. And I asked the audience, this is in England. I asked the audience, have you ever heard of John Locke? And to a man and a woman, no one had heard of him. And I said, well, he was from Oxford. He had degrees in philosophy and theology, and he was a medical doctor, and he was a jurist. And our Constitution is based on everything coming from his particular mind. They had no idea. I said, John Locke was watching the colonists in America, the early colonists. He thought, this is really interesting. They could do something that's never been done before. And I hope you'll stay with me on this because I'll get back into the science in just a moment. But this is very important because this is what drives the movement. You have to understand it's two political philosophies that are colliding, and only one's going to survive. One promises prosperity and hope and encouragement, and the other promises doom and gloom and control. John Locke. He watched these people in the colonies in America, his brothers and sisters, in many cases from England, and he said, you know what, if they did this right, they could actually create a government. It could be the first government in the history of the world without a king, without a queen, without an oligarch, without a dictator, without a military general managing things. They could do it, a government of the people, for the people, by the people. They could do this. And it would be a government that would be based on something he called natural rights. What are natural rights? Natural rights are the right to life. This is from John Locke. The right to liberty. I'll explain what liberty is in just a moment. And the right to personal property. The right to life is obvious. We all have a right to live. The right to liberty is this. He also had something called natural laws. Natural laws, it's in the heart of every man and woman. We know the difference between right and wrong, good and evil, truth and a lie. We all know. Some choose not to do the right thing, but we all know the difference. And that's natural law. It's the 10 Commandments, boiled down into this statement: do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. So John Locke said, everyone has a right to a government that will uphold natural law. A government that will uphold do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. The American experiment termed it like this: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But this all came from John Locke. Now, there was another character named Karl Marx who came along many years later. He thought life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were absolute balderdash, foolish, impossible. He saw people like John Locke as being absurd. He thought the founders of the United States of America were ridiculous. And of course, where are we today? The left will tell you, oh, they were a bunch of racists. Are they a bunch of slave owners? Karl Marx saw what was happening in America, and he despised it because he had come up with something called the laws of matter. And I break these down in my book. And if I could just summarize them, because there are 3 laws of matter. The first is love, passion, value, and feelings are not composed of matter and therefore imaginary. Belief in God is fantasy. Even consciousness is simply the result of material interactions within the human brain. Again, these are my summaries of his laws of matter. The human race is naturally inclined toward overpopulation, incapable of peace and harmony without intervention from those born with a leap of intelligence beyond the masses. Those superior beings have a responsibility to collectively rule over those with less intellect. Otherwise, the lesser-minded will destroy the planet and kill one another. Remember that one. Remember that second law of matter. And then third, Thus, power must rest in the hands of a very few, assuring that the working class is kept content and compliant. Progressive laws, regulations, ethics, and ethos must be promoted and enforced. So, again, Karl Marx and so many on the left, certainly all the leaders of the Democrat Party, and every socialist on the planet and every communist on the planet believes the same thing. They believe some people are just born with a leap of intelligence, just a better brain than the other people. And for those born with those better brains, there's some sort of metaphysical right to rule over everybody else, keep them in their place. Because otherwise, left to their own devices, they will kill one another and they will destroy the planet. So they need a heavy-handed form of government to keep them under control. And that is what this climate agenda is all about. It's their best weapon, and it's a weapon that has been employed since the 1800s, as I will prove. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels said it like this: the theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence: the abolition of private property. Remember, life, liberty, property. Private property comes about through capitalism. Capitalism is evil. It's not fair. We need to abolish private property ownership. Saul Alinsky, in his book Rules for Radicals, 1971, said this, and I'll tie this in: pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. The target: humans causing global warming, causing climate change. It's killing people. They're the problem. And we're going to stay on this like white on rice. We're not going to let go. We're going to drive it in. We'll get our ambassadors. We'll get the John Kerrys. We'll get the Leonardo DiCaprios. We'll get the Gretas. We'll get the Michael Manns. We'll get all of our people together. We'll pick the target. We'll freeze it. We'll personalize it. We'll polarize it. Regulations, laws, policies, guidelines, strategies, rules, control. Environmental regulation equals the control of personal property. Now, get ready for a shocker. The first guy that I have been aware of to go down this road, I read a lot of Karl Marx, and I read a lot of his writing partner, Friedrich Engels. This is from Engels' Dialectics of Nature, 1883. He's talking, well, I'll just read it. But inexorably, the time will come when the declining warmth of the sun will no longer suffice to melt the ice thrusting itself from the poles, when the human race, crowding more and more about the equator, will finally no longer find even there enough heat for life, when gradually even the last trace of organic life will vanish, and the Earth, an extinct frozen globe like the moon, will circle in deepest darkness and in an ever narrower orbit about the equally extinct sun, and at last fall into it. Capitalism would kill the climate and destroy the Earth. That's basically what he's saying. That's from 1883. I believe that Karl Marx and Engels realized their most effective tool to destroy capitalism would be the environment. 1883. But now let's connect the dots with these various degrees of separation. So, of course, Friedrich Engels was, his writing partner, and his hero was Karl Marx. Karl Marx is the father of communism, modern communism. He had a gentleman who was his very good friend and colleague, Professor Justus von Liebig. They were good friends. They were on the same page when it came to communism. Justus von Liebig decried the use of guano as a crop fertilizer, likening it to a robbery system that sucks the lifeblood from humanity. What was happening in the 1800s that in England, especially in the UK, they were using guano as a fertilizer. They were collecting guano from all over the world, using it as a fertilizer. The crops were growing spectacularly. And that meant people were eating better. And because they were eating better, they were healthier. They were having bigger families, and bigger families demanded bigger houses. And bigger houses demanded all sorts of other things, including, more horses and more cows and all of this, chickens. And he was appalled by the use of guano because it was making life better. It was a robbery system that sucks the life blood from humanity. He wrote this in his book, Organic Chemistry and Its Application to Agriculture and Physiology. Professor Edwin Ray Lancaster was a student and friend of Marx and was also very fond of von Liebig, and described humans as the insurgent son of nature. So he was picking up this theme in his professorial duties and telling his students and his readers of Nature and Man in 1905 that humans were the insurgent son of nature. Now we've got Professor Arthur Tainsley. He was a star pupil of Lancaster, very fond of Liebig's work, and of course, fond of Marx's as well. He coined the term ecosystem. He needed a term that could be used to effectively bash capitalism and the way he felt capitalism was harming ecology. So he came up with the term ecosystem. An ecosystem can mean everything from that puddle in your backyard to, a Great Lake or an ocean. Diabolically brilliant. He stated he was deeply concerned with the destructive human activities of the modern world, and he argued ecology must be applied to conditions brought about by human activity. He wrote this in the magazine Ecology in 1935, the use and abuse of vegetational concepts and terms. And then there's Professor Charles Elton, a protege of Tainsley. He said this: it's not just nuclear bombs and war that threaten us. There are other sorts of explosions. And this book, his book, The Ecology of Invasions by Animals and Plants, this book is about ecological explosions. You see, we human beings, in our efforts to live better, more comfortable, more productive lives, are destroying and killing the planet. Marx to Elton, minimal degrees of separation. And then we go to this guy. Now, I'm not trying to be outrageous here, but this is Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin, obviously a devoted student of Marx. He ruled the Soviet Union from 1917 to 1924. And while he was ruling the Soviet Union, it went to hell in a handbasket. Oh, it would recover, so to speak, and it would continue its reign for many years. But when he took over, there was mass starvation. There was just no food on the shelves. And people were freezing in their homes. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. And of course, there was also, mass murder taking place, the government going after renegades. But all that said, it was Lenin who was fond of the works of Liebig and Lancaster and Tainsley and Elton. And while people were starving in his country, and while people were being murdered and executed in his country, he was writing lengthy decrees to preserve nature and abolish the ownership of private property. I've got a lot of this detailed in the book, Climate Cult. But just to keep it short, he insisted that nature's resources should never be used for profit of any sort, only for the common good, and even then, only if necessary. So he outlawed collecting firewood, even just branches that were on the ground. It was against the law to collect them. This is that ridiculous environmental preservationist mentality. Now, this is why we have so many forest fires, especially in the United States. We no longer manage the forests. We let them overgrow and just let them overgrow. That's the preservationist mentality. As opposed to the conservationist mentality would say, no, we could clean this place up, make it look pretty good, and in terms of fire danger, it wouldn't be so dangerous. It's what the Native Americans used to do in this country. He allowed the collecting of firewood. Was it no wonder that people were freezing to death in the winters in his Soviet Russia? He created nature preserves that were off limits to the people, just like we have in the United States of America. You go, especially the Golden Gate Recreation Area, on either side of the San Francisco Bay, Golden Gate Recreation Area. It's federal. If you veer off the paths, there are armed guards in certain locations to make sure you stay on the path. What is that all about? So many of our national forests and national wildlife areas we have designated areas for humans, but the rest is off limits. This comes right from Vladimir Lenin. Even though we are the federal government, we're the people, but you can't walk in the land that we supposedly all own. But then you go from Vladimir Lenin to this guy, just to show you these degrees of separation and how it takes us up to the modern environmental movement. H.J. Muller was a Nobel Prize winner in genetics. He was an unabashed American communist. He left the United States for Germany in 1932 and saw that Germany was not going the way he was expecting it to be going. It was a kind of socialism that obviously something that really bothered him about it. So he moved to Soviet Russia because he couldn't stand the United States of America. Why am I bringing this up? Because Rachel Carson, who is a goddess of the environmental movement, best-selling author of Silent Spring, references Muller's work in her signature book. She admired the heck out of this communist, Rachel Carson. And we know that Silent Spring is filled with so much, not just misinformation, but just disinformation. And yet she's heralded as this queen of the environmental movement. And even the things that the left agrees, she was a little off on that. That really didn't pan out quite right. They love her. They love her. And by the way, she was obsessed with the works of Tainsley and Elton. In fact, she borrows a phrase in Silent Spring from Elton, and I think she uses it in one of her other books as well, but she uses this term, reign of death. They love this kind of wild imagery. And they're so good at putting it forward as if it were fact. And what about this woman? Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, sponsor of the New Green Deal. The New Green Deal, of course, has never gotten off the ground, but much of it was implemented in the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act has $400 billion that goes to various green projects, most of it going into the pockets of NGOs and various nonprofits, and some of it redistributed to poor neighborhoods, et cetera. But it has nothing to do with stopping so-called climate change. She's sponsor of the New Green Deal. Now, there are some who say the New Green Deal, some Republican estimates say it would cost, at the end of the day, $93 trillion. I don't know if they're being serious or being outlandish, but the New Green Deal is, or I should say the Green New Deal is outlandish. I know that McKinley and Associates have said that it would cost about $500 billion. Either way, it's loaded with taxpayer money that's being given in such a way that it's paying off Democrat benefactors. It's buying votes from the people whose communities are going to be getting this largesse. It has nothing to do with, quote unquote, saving the environment. So that's AOC. You probably know a little bit about her. But did you know who one of her very good friends in the Senate is? I'll tell you in just a moment. We don't have time to sit on our hands as our planet burns, AOC says. For the young people, climate change is bigger than election or re-election. It's life or death. Life or death. John Kerry, DiCaprio, AOC, they're all using the same language. Kamala Harris, when she was senator, she had one of the worst voting records in the Senate. She didn't show up for votes. She didn't show up a lot of time when she was in the Senate. But one of her good friends is AOC. And in 2020, they got together to take the the Green New Deal idea on steroids. It was a bill that they entitled the Climate Equity Act of 2020. Now, keep in mind, and I'm speaking now as a political commentator, when you hear the word equity, it means getting even. The Climate Equity Act of 2020. These were the sponsors of this bill. The bill was so outlandish and so far to the left that they couldn't get another co-sponsor. Bernie Sanders wouldn't even go along with this one. So it never came up for a vote. But I've got news for you. If this is what's on the heart of Kamala Harris, watch out, because if she were to become president, she's going to start doing things like the Climate Equity Act. This was, no one knows how much it would cost, but it was just one of these quote unquote green boondoggles that would give money to what they call frontline communities to redistribute wealth, to buy votes, and ensure that they would have that voting block in the palm of their hand forever. And it's actually quite frightening what this bill would do. It would require relevant federal grant-making investment programs to undergo review to ensure that these frontline communities benefit by targeting investments and addressing existing barriers. Okay, this is all gobbledygook, but essentially it's getting even. It would establish an independent office of climate and environmental justice accountability. That's frightening. An office of climate and environmental justice accountability with a board of advisors made up of members and allies of frontline communities to represent the views of frontline communities in rulemaking at the beginning of the rulemaking process. So you're empowering these stakeholders in various towns, cities, counties, states, all across the country to act essentially as empowered green shirts to judge the way the rest of us live. It would establish a new position of Director for Climate and Environmental Justice at all relevant agencies to ensure compliance and coordination. So that's all in the book, Climate Cult, and then some. Tom, I know that you know from having read the book, and I do appreciate you reading the book, there's more. You know, this is the appeal for climate sanity, but included in the book, there was something I know that you found interesting that you were hoping I could talk about perhaps in this podcast episode, correct?
Yeah, I definitely would like to hear your thoughts on geoengineering for sure.
I love it. And I'm so glad you brought that up. I wasn't sure if I should bring it up in this particular podcast episode or not, but this is the photo that you sent to me earlier today. And you repeat your question to me, Tom.
Well, I'm just wondering if you have a sense as to how we could tell regular vapor trail contrails from any attempt at geoengineering. I cannot tell. So what do you think?
Yeah, those are interesting cirrus clouds coming in from different angles at different levels. So I do have I shouldn't be laughing about this. It's not a laughing matter. But in the book, and I'm just going to pull out my copy really quick. In the book, I talk about geoengineering and solar geoengineering. And this is incredibly troubling, friends. I know when you go down this road, a lot of people will say, okay, you're getting into, Twilight Zone type stuff. But in the book, I talk about this. And if you don't mind, I'll just refer to my own book. There's a dramatic research paper that was written by the Air Force, or prepared, I should say, for the Air Force in 1996. It was called Owning the Weather in 2025. And the paper details topics such as storm enhancement. So this would be artificially enhancing storms, precipitation denial, again, artificially inducing droughts in this particular case, precipitation avoidance, in other words, improving the comfort level by, mitigating precipitation amounts, and also something called cloud removal. And the research paper also speaks of alteration of global climate on far-reaching and/or lasting scales, something the authors imply was not possible in 1996, but once available would be considered potential military, would have potential military options, and would also just give the United States an edge over all the countries in the world. So this is a 1996 paper prepared for the Air Force, and they're talking about the need for geoengineering, modifying the weather. Okay, so that's just one paper, but I talk about some other things here that I think are really, really important, and you need to hear this. The Council on Foreign Relations is an organization, and I've known people who have been members of the Council on Foreign Relations, and it's incredibly left-leaning. A guest blogger at their website said this: drastic action is needed before the window of opportunity closes altogether. I talk about geoengineering. Injecting particulate into the lower atmosphere, for instance, could help cool the planet by reflecting sunlight to space. Failing to study and develop geoengineering methods to help prevent the severe effects of climate change would be irresponsible. There are people who are pushing for geoengineering, pushing for active weather modification on a large scale, pushing for seeding the upper atmosphere with particulate and creating weather in the upper atmosphere where weather doesn't exist. Here's the Progressive Brookings Institute. I'll give you another example. They make an urgent appeal for solar engineering. States should collaborate and refine international norms and institutions to adequately prepare the world for the inevitable stresses of continued climate change and the resulting reaction from states and other actors. In other words, we got to do this. Their fear is that the temperature of the earth is warming. We got to do something about it. We have to do something artificial that's never been done before. It's worth whatever risk may be out there. But wait, there's more. 2023, George Soros, he was 92 in 2023. He took to the stage of the Munich Security Conference, and he said this: George Soros, who's likely funding a lot of this. Well, I know he has funded geoengineering programs, for example, at Harvard, and so has Bill Gates. He says, let me start with a bold assertion. Our civilization is in danger of collapsing because of the inexorable advance of climate change. Sir David King, that's a climate scientist, Sir David King has a plan to repair the climate system. He wants to recreate the albedo levels by creating white clouds high above the Earth, obviously in the stratosphere. The message is clear. Human interference has destroyed a previously stable system, and human ingenuity will be needed to restore it. The climate system is broken and needed to be repaired. This is George Soros. Now we're getting into some very dangerous stuff. Again, Bill Gates, 2021, financially backed the Harvard University Solar Geoengineering Research Program. The thing I find interesting, and I talk about this in the book, Tom, as you know, is that we have all of these institutions. So you've got Harvard involved, you've got Princeton involved, you've got the University of Chicago involved, and a number of universities in the United States and all over the world involved in all this. But no one will admit to actually engaging in geoengineering. For them, it's all, on computer models, it's all on whiteboards, but they're actually saying, no, we haven't tried this yet. I'm looking at the screen of the photo, Tom, that we have here, and I'm thinking, well, then what is all that? This is just random jetliners flying in different directions at different altitudes and sometimes at the same altitude. This is bizarre. No one will admit to doing whatever that might be, if indeed it is some kind of geoengineering experiment, except for one guy who, well, maybe he won't admit to actually doing it, but he's one of the top players in this space. He wrote the book, The Case for Climate Engineering. His name is Dr. David Keith. He used to be at Harvard. Now he's at the University of Chicago studying this very same thing. He was on Colbert's show a number of years ago. And I realized Colbert's a comic. But Colbert was engaging this guy in an interview. And Keith is all for it. And he says, yeah, some people will die in the process, but it's just something. And Colbert says, some people will die. Well, yeah, I mean, some people are going to die, but people are already dying because of this climate disaster. So if we just add a few more deaths to the mix, I mean, we're going to be changing the climate altogether and it will be better in the long run. But he admits to actually potentially killing people in the process.
So
That was on Colbert.
let me just make a point here. I think you make a very good point that there are a number of people that are so crazy and they're so afraid of the danger of CO2 that they're just happy to do these experiments of spraying stuff in the sky because, like you said, it might be dangerous, but we have to save human civilization. So we got to do this, right?
Exactly, Tom. Exactly. So let me get to this one portion of the book then, because I found, I just, okay, I saw the Colbert interview and I'm thinking there's got to be more on this David Keith guy. I got to find something that I can share with the audience. So I examined one research paper co-written by Keith that literally says the falling sulfuric acid, because that's what you would seed, the sky with, sulfuric acid. The falling sulfuric acid aerosol will add to the existing burden of near-surface fine particulate matter. Hope you're still with me here. Degrading surface air quality and incurring public health damages in the form of increased respiratory disease mortality rates. By offsetting 1 degree Celsius of atmospheric warming, greater concentrations are formed from existing emissions, resulting in an additional 69,000 premature mortalities per year. So, in other words, 69,000 deaths while trying to save the Earth. And I asked this question, what's to say that's an underestimate? And there are additional concerns. Sulfites continue to gnaw into the ozone layer, which is the planet's primary solar radiation diffuser. And while SO2 injected into the atmosphere could, theoretically, have a cooling effect in the lower atmosphere, it warms the stratosphere. And the stratosphere is void of weather. So we have no idea what kind of weather patterns that might stir up because the models, by the way, are incapable of predicting such things. And yet, at the same time, I've got this interview that I talk about, was on CNBC. It was UCLA environmental law professor, Edward Parson is the guy's name, Edward Parson, an advocate of solar geoengineering. This is madness. And he said, he admitted spraying sulfur into the stratosphere will, quote, mess with the ozone chemistry. But given the potential harm to both the environment and humans, Parson was then asked this question, whether the known negatives are worth rolling the dice. And he said, yes, it's worth rolling the dice. Respiratory illness is bad, he said, absolutely. And spraying sulfur into the stratosphere would contribute in the bad direction to all of those effects. But you have to ask yourself, how much and relative to what? So in other words, these people are willing to roll the dice with the upper atmosphere, playing games with sulfur dioxide to try tweak the temperature of the Earth, fully knowing that thousands of people could die in the process. These people are sick in the brain. And that's why I call the book Climate Cult. And again, this is the quote from Dr. Keith. I examined one research paper, talks about falling sulfuric acid. Aerosol will add to the existing burden of the near surface fine particulate matter, 69,000 premature mortalities every year. So Tom, that's I'm glad you brought that up because this is frightening stuff. And I just hope that people realize we're dealing with we're dealing with a cult. People have bought into this hook, line, and sinker. And it's being taught in schools from kindergarten through high school on an interdisciplinary basis. You can find it in being taught or interjected into every course in every college class in the United States of America and the developed world. And people are this is being shoved down the throats of individuals to the point where if they say no, if they say I don't agree, there is so much peer pressure. Therefore, the pressure to conform is immense. And I believe the Democratic Party understands this, and they're using it to assert control, maintain a voter base, and put us under their thumb. So for such a time as this, I say, God, please bless America, because boy, do we need it. And Tom, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share. And I hope I didn't go too long. I was pretty wound up.
Thank you. This is fabulous data. I did a whole thread that I just sent you via email, a thread of quotes from your book about geoengineering. Very interesting. But here's one from your book. Just as disturbing is the fact that no one is honest about any actual experiments that have been conducted with aerosols in the stratosphere without the knowledge or approval of the citizens of the countries where they are taking place. Circumstantial and other evidence is abundant that solar geoengineering has moved beyond the models. Would any reasonable person, when presented with the facts, believe that hundreds of scientists are spending their entire careers only on running computer simulations of stratospheric spraying? I highly doubt it. I think it's a great point that really all these people are just modeling and they're not trying it. I'm not buying that.
Right.
There's
I'm
that.
not buying that either.
And here's the second one here. I'll also put this in the show notes. It's just an admission I found of NOAA saying that they spent over a 20-year period, they spent quite a bit of time actually trying to modify hurricanes. You may have seen this. That, let's see. It says they had a program called Storm Fury where they dropped silver iodide into hurricanes. During those years, they seeded clouds in hurricanes Esther in 61, Beulah in 63, Debbie in 69, Ginger in 71. And they thought it was working. I mean, they spent a lot of time on this, and now they say we're not doing it anymore, and it's not possible to affect a hurricane in any way. But again, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know what they can do, but I'm not convinced that they're not still trying it. I don't know.
I would agree. I'm not convinced that they're not still trying it. And I would love to have the ear of the president, assuming that next president might be a Donald Trump, just to be able to share with him some of this information and beg him to look into whether or not government agencies are actually engaged in this kind of behavior, because it seems to me to be so reckless and so potentially wildly dangerous. So I'm with you on this, Tom. The word needs to get out. And there are some wonderful individuals who have been championing this for some time, but I wanted to try include it in my book in a very reasonable way so that people would be able to just take a step back and say, okay, wait a second, there is something going on here that just does not appear to be kosher. What's happening? And that was my point. And I hope that it causes people to get engaged on this issue, learn more, and hopefully make sure that this does not happen. Or if it is happening, stop it now.
All right. Any other points you want to make before we do finish this one up?
No, I think that I just really this climate agenda, I've just given such a large part of my life over to exposing this. And again, I appreciate all the people that you have on a regular basis, Tom. These are some bright minds. I learned so much from them, but I come in with a little different point of view, hoping that it will open the eyes of many to see that we're being led down a path that throughout history has not ended well.
All right. Thanks for all your work and producing this book. There's so much data, so many facts in there. It's not just you guessing about stuff. It's a lot of research went into it. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Talk to you later. Brian Sussman. Goodbye.